Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Women in Innovation Building Success webinar on presentation skills. Before I hand over to our host, Kezia, for today's presentation, I'll just go through a few things. So this is being recorded and we will circulate after the webinar the recording and the slides to everybody that's joined us today or registered. We will also everyone will be on mute throughout the duration, and we'll be holding a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box and I'll read them out towards the end of the webinar. I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar, and I'll hand over to our host, Kezia, now.
Thank you, Shwan. Good afternoon now, I guess it is, everyone, and a warm welcome to this webinar on presentation skills. And today I want to focus on building authentic confidence when it comes to presentations. That means, how can you as an individual build on your own unique skill set and personality to become more confident? So as Shwan says, my name is Kezia. I currently head up KTN's Innovation Insights and Policy team, and that's me there. Hello. I've included my photo so that this is less of a disembodied voice talking to you, and to reassure you that I am a real person and that I've been on my own journey with building my confidence at presenting. I vividly remember the first time I had to do a big public presentation. I had to step in for my boss. I think there was about 200 people in the room to do this talk, and I was petrified. I did briefly consider, you know, that thing that you hear where people say, "Oh, picture the audience where in their underwear, and that'll calm you down." And even the thought of attempting that just made me feel completely ill, and so just completely avoided doing that. In the end, I just went for some deep breaths and forced myself to smile, and I forced myself onto the stage and do the talk. And it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Some people smiled at me, maybe they felt sorry for me, I don't know, but it helped either way. And as it went on, I actually remembered that I did know what I was talking about. And in the end, it was over and I had survived. So that was the main thing. But I know then maybe over the subsequent years, I've had to present to a lot of different audiences on quite a lot of different topic areas, actually, with quite a wide variety of preparation time, or should we say maybe lack of preparation time. And so I've managed to figure out what works for me, what I need to do, and what I can get away with. So actually, as well as growing in confidence, I actually look forward to presenting now in a way that I could really never have imagined on that initial day. And not only have I had to make a lot of presentations, I've had to listen. I have listened to even more, and from investment pitches, keynotes, speeches, internal update presentations, workshops, webinars, all kinds of things. And of course, there have been some fairly awful ones, but there have been some really great ones too. And so I want to share with you just now is some of the things that I've learned along the way. And the first question I would ask you is why? What is your motivation for your presentation? And then the second thing I'm going to ask you is also why? Why are you really presenting? What is your real motivation here? And I find it does typically take two whys to get to the real reason, at least. So for example, if you're doing an investment pitch, the first why might be because you need to raise money for your company. But the second why is actually something deeper about your own motivation. This is because this is your dream, you believe your product is going to change the world, or you want others to be as excited about this as you are. So really it's an opportunity for you to tell your story, to raise awareness, and to share your passion project. So for me, with this presentation, for example, my first why is literally because Shwan asked me. I like Shwan, she asked me very nicely. It was an easy decision. Really though, for me, it's about sharing what I've learned in the hope that it helps others. I get a huge sense of reward from supporting others, and if anything at all that I say today helps enable you to take a step towards achieving your goals, then that makes it worth it for me. And so thinking about that why rather than the what you're presenting can help you tap into your enthusiasm and your natural confidence. But when asked to present, you will most likely be better informed than the audience on the subject matter. That's kind of your given, I guess. Like, you were there to convey some information to some other people that they maybe don't already know. So you have that experience, you have the knowledge, you have the expertise to support the statements that you make. So that's not in question. When this understanding is combined with passion, it's infectious. It's amazing what a bit of enthusiasm can do to cover up those nerves. You have great words to say, but they also need to be delivered in a clear and concise way so the audience gets to hear you and really takes in the messages. And great presenters really use pace and tone for effect and to maintain interest. Also considering how you portray the information through example, through storytelling or humor. And great presenters really capture all of these elements together, and that's what gives them the confidence. Simple, I hear you say. Being serious though, the point of this is really not to overwhelm you. It's about showing how you can break it down into manageable chunks, focusing on one area to improve or to focus in on at any one time until that becomes habitual, and then you can move on and focus on something else. So let's explore this in more detail. At the end of an event, which presentations do you remember and why? And try to remember the ones that stay with you for a good reason, not because they were so awful you wanted to cry. So when you're thinking of those great presentations, what stays with you? Is it something about the message? What were the main messages? Could you repeat those messages? A strong presentation usually has a really strong headline message that you can replicate and share with others. And more than that, there's something there about presentations that have a really strong narrative. Perhaps that might be some personal element to the story, something that really makes it come alive, and that's what's really powerful. So as a story consultant, Robert McGee says, storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world. Have you ever seen a presentation that was actually a bit too slick and a bit too polished, and maybe wondered why you didn't enjoy it even though it seemed to be perfect on paper or perfect on screen? And that might be because they failed to build trust with the audience. And trust is vital, as actually going to make or break whether an audience actually listens or completely disregards everything that you've said. This is really why I've called this session Building Authentic Confidence, because to me those two things are completely linked. If you have that authenticity, that will give you confidence, and that confidence is really worth nothing unless you have trust of people that you're speaking to. So how can we build that authenticity and that trust with your audience? Through credibility, and I have no question that you can demonstrate your credibility, going back to that knowledge and that expertise that you have, by being reliable. And actually, so in terms of presentations, that might mean being punctual in your delivery, sticking to the timings, meeting the objectives of the presentations. And through intimacy, so think of it as having a conversation not at the audience, but by giving the impression that you're having a conversation with the audience. These are counterbalanced though by perceived self-interest, and I've highlighted perceived there because of course everyone has an agenda and self-interest. That's fine. It's when the audience feels manipulated or like the speaker's true motivations are being hidden that it erodes the trust. So it's important to consider what you want to get out of a presentation and ensure that that aligns with what the audience are expecting. Right, so it feels like maybe quite late into this presentation to actually be asking the question, what is a presentation? But I just want to actually go back to basics on what this is. So it can literally just be something that you say, and that might be a long crafted speech that you've learnt off by heart and really worked on. It could be a couple of bullet points on a note card, or it might even be something completely off the cuff and ad hoc. And that's usually complemented by something that you show, usually. So that could be a slide deck, could be a prop of some kind. Maybe you could be doing a product pitch, for example, you might actually bring a product along and show how that works. But it's really about adding value. So giving something, providing additional information that you maybe are not going to run through. So you can also maybe include a follow-up element to this, and that might be sharing your presentation afterwards. That might be re-emphasizing a call to action that you had as part of your presentation. It's another opportunity to share your message. And this is, I mean, I'm sure Shawana is going to be laughing in the background here just as well, she's on mute, but because I say this a lot, but a presentation is not a handout. Sending out an email copy of your slides is not necessarily the best way of disseminating the information that you've got. And I think people can get themselves tied up in a bit of a knot by thinking of the slide as being, the slide deck as being both these things, as the thing that's going to create an impact, visual impact in the presentation, and the thing that can be used as a handout. I would suggest you separate the two things and consider them individually, and then adapt it as necessary. And really here the message is that how you present is as important as what you present. So let's look at that how, because I know that I often find myself spending way too long preparing the slide deck and making it all look lovely, and rather than thinking about down into verbal and non-verbal ways of how you present. So when we look at verbal elements, there's the obvious one of volume, how loud or how quiet. And your voice should be loud enough that people can hear you, but without you having to shout. And if you feel that you're having to shout, make sure that you find yourself a microphone of some kind. If it's a big room, you know, check the acoustics and make sure you've got that volume, because you really don't want to be shouting. That's going to completely throw you off. Your pitch, so that's how high or how low sounding your voice is. And it's good to be aware of your natural pitch and then think about how that could be altered in different circumstances to create different effects. Being clear and concise, so this is around avoiding jargon and acronyms unless you're confident that everyone in your audience knows them. Quantity does not equal quality here. People can actually take in more when you say less. Pace, so how quickly or slowly you speak. I usually try and aim for slightly slower than my normal conversation pace. I tend to I have a tendency to speak quite quickly, and so I do make a conscious attempt to slow that down so that that my audience can keep up with what I'm saying. If you have a lot of material to cover in your presentation, it's best not to hurry. Instead, think of other ways that you can provide that information. So it could be cut down the length of what you're going to say, or maybe think about how you could provide supplementary information in a handout, for example. Plan to cover your main messages as a reasonable pace rather than rushing through a lot more things. As I was saying before, less is more. Tones, that's the mood we set by our voice. So thinking about how do you want to come across? Do you want to seem very calm, friendly, enthusiastic? And then finally, tics. And these are the sounds that we use when we're thinking about what to say next or filling a moment of silence. So the classic ums and airs and other little noises that you might make. And a good trick here is to record yourself doing a short pitch. You know, it can even be something like 30 seconds. And then listen back and see if you can spot when you're making any regular tics. Now, everybody does them. They are part of natural language, so don't worry too much about this. But if you've got something that you know that you're conscious of doing that is part of your presentation style, then you can think about whether you would want to try and take steps to remove them. So another colleague that I have used to say an at the start of every slide, for example, and he worked out that he says it in his head now, so he tries to not verbalize it, but he says it in his head, and actually it comes across as a sort of really poignant pause rather than a tick. So that's a useful trick. Finally, I'll just say, remember to try and breathe normally. So there's a tendency in presentations, particularly if you're feeling a bit nervous, to take a massive breath and then try and get everything out all at once, and without, what was the thing I was going to say, and So actually just trying to control your breathing and focusing on that can be really useful in terms of dealing with all of these other things. And then the non-verbal. So actually most of our communication is non-verbal. That's obviously making my life more difficult today because you can't see any of my hand gestures or my posture or my facial expressions. But this is really all about the things that we communicate when we're not, without using words. So that can be how you walk, you sit, stand, even hold your head. It can be an indicator of your mood and really just your general personality. So my lovely picture here is an example of posture there. We're crossing your arms. That could indicate that you're being closed off or defensive. So consciously deciding what your posture is going to be can affect how people perceive you as a presenter. And there's not about saying you have to stand still or you have to walk around, but by being conscious of what makes you comfortable. So I prefer to at least have the option to move about. I really don't like standing behind a lectern, for example. It makes me feel small and sort of invisible, and the side, or be able to walk around a little bit more. But of course everybody is different, so figure out what's going to work for you. Again, with hand gestures, it's a similar thing. Find what feels comfortable and appears natural. Some useful tips here are using open palms to put the audience at ease, and a general rule of keeping your gestures between your hips and your shoulders, so as not to run the risk of distracting the audience. Although, of course, if you're wanting to make a really big statement, then you can move out with that. Eye contact, again, really important. I again find that really helpful in terms of my confidence levels, because by making eye contact, by smiling at a few people, it just relaxes me, because I remember that, these are not scary, hostile people. They're people who are interested in what I've come to say. And lastly, I've put in clothing and accessories. So although we don't like to think that maybe that what we wear should matter, but we have to accept that people do judge us on how we look, and that includes what we wear, and it is a conscious choice. So it's something to consider, even if it's something you say, I've considered it and I don't care. So confidence is really what I find most people struggle with when presenting, and it can really come from a number of sources. So it could be simple nerves, be self-doubt, fear of judgment. And so here's a little trick to help with pre-performance nerves, and I hope you appreciate as well that me sharing this video of me looking like an idiot is also me creating intimacy with my audience when I can't see any of you. So basically this is a trick that I've learned, that it's designed to just sort of trick your body into thinking you're calm and relaxed. So when we're scared, our body goes into fight or flight mode, as you're getting ready to run. You know that feeling before you have to stand up and speak. Your heart rate's up, your breathing's faster, maybe got a bit of sweaty palms going on, and you're just thinking, right, I'm legging it out the exit here. So using this little peripheral vision trick can actually reverse this, because when your peripheral vision's engaged is when you're calm and relaxed. And so you can actually, by engaging your peripheral vision, trick your body into thinking that it too is calm and relaxed. So let's watch the cringy video. Let's hope it works. Delightful, thank you. So basically you stand with your fingers stretched out in front of you. So your eyes are focused in on a point, you're focused in on your threat. So look at your fingers, and then as you move your fingers out to each side, try to keep looking at them. And you should be able to relax your gaze so that you can see both your arms stretched out at your sides. And that's then you're in peripheral vision. You can see all around you. You're, you know, appropriately scanning the savannah for danger. So you're not in threat, you're calm and relaxed. Take a deep breath. You're going to totally be able to rock your presentation. So other things to try could include doing a power pose. So I like to stand with my feet hip width apart, so I've got strong grounding, and that way I can move my arms around without feeling unsteady or unbalanced. Relax my shoulders, standing up straight. Actually look confident, and that really quick, it's amazing, honestly. It's amazing how quickly that makes me feel confident. But like, these are things that work for me. The main thing is to find something that works for you. And, you know, going back to my earlier comment, if picturing the audience in their pants is something that you find helps you, then, you know, go for it. Oh, okay, let's not watch that again. Okay, so now we've looked at how you present, let's think about what you present. And remember that, so what you present is a means of enhancing your presentation using visuals, not replacing what you're saying. So how to begin? I'm going to go through some steps that I think are helpful to building a compelling presentation. But first, I mean, I know you can't answer me, but I'm putting this question out there. How many of you honestly begin a presentation by opening up PowerPoint? Jump straight into that stage 4, start putting your slides together, and then edit it back to the length of time you have or to the purpose. These stages don't all have to be super formal or lengthy, but honestly, it is worth doing it this way around. You will find that it saves you time and effort. So let's rebalance it. Starting out by understanding the purpose of your presentation, identifying the key message you want to get across, and then sketching out at a high level what you think your presentation will look like. How are you going to build that narrative to convey those key messages? Then you can start to think about developing the content that's going to sit within this. That's your slide deck, your props, whatever you think is going to enhance your talk. And making sure that you've done this in enough time so you then have the opportunity to practice your presentation before you have to present it for real. As I know that that is the bit that often gets completely squeezed out of the timeline. And so the first time you've said your presentation out loud is in front of an audience. And it's really disconcerting for me just talking into the void here, but I'm going to imagine you all just nodding your heads and possibly smiling ruefully that this is exactly what you do. But so of course it doesn't really make sense to expect yourself to be able to deliver a perfect presentation first time. And it doesn't matter how often I present, I still find that there is a difference between the flow that I have in my head when I put the slides together and then the flow of my words out loud. Only by saying my presentation out loud, and it doesn't have to be to anyone, you know, this is not the first time that I've sat in a room by myself speaking aloud to myself. Okay, now I'm sounding even more crazy. But only by saying that presentation out loud do I really get a sense of the narrative of my talk. And finally, remember that every presentation you give is an opportunity to learn. And really, presentation skills is something that you can really only master by getting out there and presenting as much as you can. For a start, this will reduce your nerves, becomes part of your comfort zone, honestly, and then you can start to refine your skills. So going back to the start, presentations can come in many different shapes and sizes, and each require a different presentation style and varying degrees of audience interaction. So understanding the brief is really important in determining what level of detail is required, even when you'll be required to answer questions, for example, and even the level of formality in which you're presenting. So, for example, a keynote would be more formal than a workshop. In a webinar, in some degrees, less formal. I mean, no one can see you, so there's no point worrying about what you're going to be wearing. You know, I could be in my pajamas right now, although actually I'm not because I'm in the office, but you don't know that. In a workshop, you'll probably deal with questions as you go along, where in a briefing or keynote, questions might be at the end only. What else? So in a briefing, dissemination of information is really important. And so a handout might be really helpful in that situation to ensure that your main messages are conveyed. In a keynote, it might be more about your viewpoint, and the narrative and story that you're going to tell are going to be important. And then with a pitch, you're combining both of those features. A panel, you might think, might be less easy to prepare for as question-based, but then equally, you don't normally have to worry about preparing a slide deck. So you really need to think through all of these different aspects before you can start to figure out what you need to put together. So as well as the type of event, presentations should consider your audience. So how many people are going to be there? Who are they? If it's in a physical room, what's the layout? Will you have a microphone? Will you have a headset? Where are you speaking in the agenda? Do you have the dreaded post-lunchtime slot or end of the day slot? How are you going to create more energy if it's at those kind of quieter times? And what are the expectations from the talk? I think I already said this around keeping it simple and avoiding jargon and acronyms. But again, thinking about what's reflecting the language and the terminology used by your audience. What is the audience most familiar with? And how can you use visuals like charts or diagrams where possible to sort of clarify that message? If your audience is online, how can you make it more engaging? Will you be visible on the video? If you can't express yourself in person, maybe think about having more content. Appearance matters. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to provide some examples of how you can play around with slide layout depending on your own style and the purpose. So here I've used some bullet points, which is effective to deliver the key messages you want to get across. Pictures can be great when delivering a keynote or a pitch, and you really want the audience to focus in on what you're saying rather than reading what's on your slides. Oh, look, I'm saying it again. A presentation is not a handout. So think about the clarity of the slides. How are the visuals adding to what you're saying, not replacing what you're saying? I mentioned earlier about the power of storytelling, and this doesn't mean inventing a fairy tale. It means that by using anecdotes, stories, and examples, you can really effectively engage your audience, make it more relatable and understandable, and they're more likely to take those messages away with them. But what's your style? Okay, so finding your style is really important to enabling you to be a confident presenter. So do you prefer to have lots of text on your slides or keep it fairly minimal? Maybe a few bullet points to remind you, or just a picture and a heading. So your style can change depending on the purpose and the audience. I've already said, you know, if in a webinar, for example, you might want more content. In a keynote, you might want a bit less. For international audiences, for workshops, or for academic audiences, for example, content-heavy slides are fairly typical. It's the sort of usual expectation. But you can try playing around with different presentation formats and styles to help maximize your messaging and finding something that feels comfortable for you. So if it feels comfortable for you, you'll feel confident with it. Q&A, the dreaded Q&A at the end. So there are some questions you can probably anticipate, and certainly on a panel session, although in some ways that might seem more out of your control, you can usually receive questions from the facilitator in advance. I've been on panel sessions where actually they've asked me to submit the questions that I want to be asked, so that's quite nice. In general, the Q&A though is out of your control. So I know this is easier said than done. Try not to waste too much of your energy worrying about it beforehand. My main advice with Q&A is answer the questions if you can, but don't bluff. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't make something up. It's okay to say that you don't know. Instead, you could think about taking the details of the question and following up afterwards. Are there other people in the audience that you know might be able to answer the question? If it's on a panel, are there other people in the panel that might be able to answer? Don't feel that you have to be able to answer every question that gets asked. You can also ask for clarification. You know, did you've said this, is this what you meant? Did you mean this? And considering why the question is being asked. I see it a lot, particularly in conferences where people will ask a question because it's an excuse to stand up and say their name and be seen to be asking a question. Or equally that they want a chance to get their view across rather than really hear more about what you have to say. So think about why they're asking the question and how you then want to proceed in terms of answering it. And if the answer to a question is really specific, if it's going to be really long-winded or not straightforward to answer, then I would suggest deferring it to answer after your presentation. So maybe picking it up with them in the networking afterwards, giving them your number or something. Nobody wants to sit and listen to a 10-minute response to something really niche that's not relevant to them. So to finish up, I've got some top tips really summarizing what I've been saying here. So thinking about who are you talking to? Who's in your audience? Remembering that they're not a hostile force. Most people in the audience will be rooting for you to do the best you can. And if you can think of them as friends, it's easier to relax into having that conversation with them that I was talking about. Thinking about the purpose of your talk. Why are you doing this? And tapping into that underlying motivation, your true motivation and passion. Considering your voice, body, and words, not just the PowerPoint slides. No one else is quite like you, and so embrace the features that are uniquely yours. Own them. What is your headliner? What do you want people to take away or action as a result of your presentation? Thinking about the end goal will help keep your presentation focused. Talking with passion, as I said, it's an amazing what a bit of passion will cover up, whether that is speaking passionately about something bad or good. And preparation is key. Leave enough time to prepare. It's really boring, but it's honestly the best tip. The more prepared you are, the more relaxed you will feel. And feeling relaxed is key to being authentically confident. Before we finish and open up for questions, I've got some further resources here that you might find helpful, and we'll send all of these as well to you as part of the feedback. So first of all, within KTM, we have a whole library of resources, including videos on specific types of presentations, for example, investment pitches. And so, we'll send you the links to those. I really like, I don't know if you've heard of this book called How to Own the Room. I think the full title is How to Own the Room, Women and the Art of Public Speaking. There's a book and a podcast. I listen to the podcast all the time. Viv Goscop, the author, interviews different people about their kind of journey with owning the room and presenting. And there's so many great tips and advice in there for anyone. Honestly, it's not even just for women. It's genuinely a really great one. TED Talks, of course, great inspiration. And again, part of the follow-up, we'll send you some links to a selection that we really like, but there are so many talks on there with loads of different styles. So there's something for everyone. Have a look and find someone whose style resonates with you and take tips from them. Your peers are a fantastic resource. So whether that's colleagues, your friends, family, you can use them as part of your practice. Can they sit and listen, give you honest feedback, or even discussing with you up front on the best way for you to get your points across. And finally, remember that every presentation is a chance to learn and improve. So get out there, put yourself forward for as many presentations as you can, even if it's terrifying to start with. I promise that it does get better, and you'll grow, you'll learn, you'll improve, you'll play around, you'll find different things that work for you, and you'll learn to love it. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be delighted to spend some time now answering any questions you have, and I've put my contact details on the screen as well, so if you want to follow up with me directly afterwards, you can.
Thanks, Kezia. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and I will read them out. Let's kick off the questions with this one. So how do you use notes in a presentation, and should you do it?
Ooh, yeah, and it's a funny one, because I've had people sort of say to me before, how do I stop using notes in a presentation? And my question back is, well, why? Why do you think notes are a bad thing? It depends why you're using them. I think what I don't like in people using notes is if you come with your full presentation printed out on A4 paper and then you don't look at the audience, you just stand with your head down, sort of reading in a monologue tone off a sheet of paper, because that's not very engaging. But actually having some notes, I think sticking to like smaller note cards just makes it a bit manageable. At the very least, it shows that you're prepared. I'd much rather that than someone just turn up and wing it and actually not really, muddled and just be sort of muddling through. I'd much rather feel that someone had gone to the effort of writing out note cards and had been that prepared of what they wanted to say. So I personally think notes are fine if it makes you feel comfortable. I know people who will take notes and they don't even look at them, but the fact they've got them in their hand just gives them that extra bit of confidence. So, if needed, if my mind goes completely blank in a total panic, I've got my bits of paper and I can read off what I'm going to say. But yeah, I think it's finding what works for you, what you feel comfortable with. Certainly, I think in of itself, aiming to not have notes isn't necessarily helpful. You got to think about why you think that. What exactly is the issue with the notes?
Okay, brilliant. And then next question we've got is, if you've been asked to present an elevator pitch, is there any tips that you've got on that?
Yep. So as I was saying, that in KTN we've got a whole resource library of videos and blogs and things supporting resources on how to do different types of presentation. And there's one in there around elevator pitches, and we've got a little, almost like a pro forma, if you like, of how to put together a really impactful, say 30-second pitch. And there are lots of different models. So again, that's about like figuring out what works for you. But it comes down to that: the less time you have, the fewer messages you can get across. And an elevator pitch is really about giving the audience a taster of wanting to know more. You're giving them just a little snippet that gives them enough that they think, I really want to speak to this person in more detail and find out more about this. Or equally, to very quickly realize, oh, that sounds really interesting, but it's not my area. I'm not interested in that that sector, that technology, or whatever it is, and so there's no point me wasting their time when they could be having other conversations. And both of those are equally valuable to you. There's something else I was going to say on elevator pitching. I mean, sometimes you see an elevator pitch, if you've got a whole bunch of them, they become a bit formulaic. So sometimes I think you've got to react to what the other people around you are saying. So how are you going to sort of stand out and be a bit different from a whole room? Because quite often in these pitching events, you'll get maybe 20 people all doing their elevator pitch, and they all use the exact same sort of pro forma, and it becomes a bit they all merge into one then. So it's thinking, well, how can you constantly sort of do something a bit different, set yourself apart from the crowd, if you like.
So another question is around who should be the person that does the presentations within the company. Should it be one set person? Should it be a mix? And if you're asked to step in someone else's shoes, should you be doing that, or should you turn around and say no?
So I think it depends on what the nature of the presentation is. So I think there's maybe a few questions within that one question, Joanne. So I've put up should there be a specific person from a company doing a presentation? but it really depends what is that presentation. Is it something that only one person in the company would really be knowledgeable enough about to do the presentation, or is it something, if you're giving an overview of I've seen it, for example, with investment pitches, where you might have the founder or the CEO does the whole kind of that like elevator pitch and the whole kind of business case and the vision, and then they might have their sort of the financial person come in and go into a bit more detail on, how are we going to make this work commercially, and that can work really well. I think as long as you've considered that in advance, and again, like thought about the narrative of, what you're going to say isn't going to contradict what I'm saying, and it's a compliment rather than adding sort of unnecessary changes for the sake of it. I think if you can say, look, I'm presenting this information, if there are specific questions about it, it will be another colleague who would be answering those. It's again thinking like how you dealing with the Q&A maybe rather than with the actual presentation, because you can probably learn enough from a colleague to be able to present on lots of different aspects, but whether you've then got enough of the background knowledge or the background expertise to go into detail about questions. And so you might want to think about how are you going to deal with the questions rather than the presentation itself. And so was there another bit at the end of that question, Siobhan, that I thought was slightly different?
If you should be the one that actually does the presentation, or if you should decline the invite.
Yeah, so declining the invitation, I think that probably comes down to personal choice. And I mean, if you really feel that you're being put on the spot, put in a situation that you don't feel comfortable with, then I think it's worth raising that and saying it, and considering, well, what are the risks of going in and doing a presentation for somebody else that you really, really do not feel comfortable doing? Are there any risks associated with that? Maybe not necessarily to yourself, but also to the company or to the organization more broadly. Going in and doing, in that investment pitch example, say if someone went in and did that on behalf of the founder, and it was someone who had maybe just joined the company and didn't really know, you could end up doing more harm than good by having a really bad presentation in that environment, because investors talk, and if they take away from that, oh, this company has no idea what they're doing. And not necessarily because you've done a bad job, but because they'll be able to see, look, this person shouldn't have been put in that situation, and that wasn't appropriate, and so we're not going to deal with that company. But we're also, we'll tell all our mates who are also investors that they shouldn't invest in this company. So I think you've really got to weigh up what might the implications be for either saying yes or saying no. But I don't know, if my view is, if you really, really, really don't think it's going to be a good thing for you, then you should make that known. Whether you get away with not doing the presentation is another thing.
As a kind of follow on from what you've just mentioned, Kezia, another thought that comes to my mind is how you kind of allocate who should be the one that presents. So if the investment pitch, for example, should it be the CEO, the COO that presents, or should it be passed to a lesser colleague, and will that reflect on the company?
Well, okay, let's not say lesser colleague. That sounds like a bit demeaning, but I know what you mean. Yeah, I think it should be the CEO, the CEO. I've had conversations with investors before where they've been quite open about saying, like, they really question it if the sort of top key individuals are not in the room. They're questioning why that is. Do they how much they really want? Do you really want investment if you're not even, your top person is not in the room making that case? So I think it's okay to bring along other colleagues, but I think those key individuals, those founders, the CEO, COO, whoever, they need to be in the room. Because you're out there, you're presenting, you're selling this opportunity to invest in this vision that you have for your company. Why would you not be in the room for that?
Yeah. Okay, another question that we've got is, how should you deal with the emotions after the presentation when in your mind all sorts of ideas come in and
Mm-hmm.
you, for instance, are saying to yourself, I should have said that, or
Oh God, yeah,
no.
yeah, the classic, the evil voice in your head that's like, oh, you said that, oh, I can't believe you said this, you said so many times. Yeah, I know the voice well. I think a great thing to do is to speak to people. So if it's at an event like a conference or whatever, speak to people after you've presented, get feedback from those people. If you happen to have a colleague or someone that you know, a sort of friend in the audience that you can ask, can you give me some critical feedback? Then that can be really helpful. If you get those positive comments, people are coming up to you afterwards and saying, oh, really, that was so interesting, I loved what you had to say, that was great, then I think the main thing to do is practice or focus on accepting that and saying thank you and taking that on board, because it's so easy to focus in and let those negative voices drown out the positive comments. I'm sure there's some actual biological evidence, science, that's saying that we are got this natural tendency to put more weight on the negative comments than the positive ones. So it's something you have to be really proactive about, is saying, right, I got this positive feedback. People were interested in what I had to say. Great. So I might have said a few but my main message got across. And again, so I was saying about focusing in on what you want your presentation to achieve. And so if you set some goals for yourself beforehand of, I would really like it if this presentation led to some follow-up conversations. Then if you get those follow-up conversations, you can objectively go back and say, look, this presentation achieved what I wanted it to. There are things that I can maybe improve for next time, but this achieved the goal that I set out to achieve. So it's a success. I think you have to sort of just go at it with lots of different approaches, really, because it's, like I say, it's so easy for I wish I'd done this. And if you really have something that, you think, I'm annoyed with myself because I've done this, and think about, well, how could you improve for next time? So it was sort of my last point there, was saying that every presentation is an opportunity to learn and improve. And I think that's all you can do. So if you come away from a presentation and say, I really wish I had said such and such, how can you ensure that next time round you'll cover all those main points that you want to cover? So maybe it's about saying, well, actually go back and saying, I'm going to write my key messages down on a note card and I'm going to have that with me on stage while I'm presenting, because then I know that I will definitely cover those points and then I won't beat myself up for that.
I hope you don't mind, but I'm just going to chip in one thing as well.
Oh yeah, please do.
So what you'll find as well is a lot of the event organizers, if it's at an event, or the follow-on materials will be given afterwards, and there might be an opportunity to insert, key messages that you maybe felt you overlooked as well in them follow-up materials, or get a message across to the audience after the event. So if it is something that you think is really, really important and you fail to mention it, just because you forgot about it, maybe ask the organizer if there's a way that you can communicate that across separately.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's really the only thing that's worthwhile really doing something about. I think there's a lot of things that we think in our heads are really obvious. So I was just speaking to a colleague before I came in to do this webinar, and he was saying, oh, I don't know why, but whenever I do presentations, I get into this habit of, I'll just start using a particular word, and it, changes every presentation, but I'll just start using a word and then I keep repeating that word. He's like, I'll then be like, I said that word 3 times in that sentence, and it kind of get building up in his head. But most of the time, other people don't notice that stuff. I was saying about how your audience is really more your friend than your foe. Nobody's sitting there going, right, what's this person's tick going to be? Oh, I can't believe that person just said the word so again. People don't generally, unless it's really, really pronounced, people generally don't even notice those things. So they tend to be things that only you know in your head and no one else has even noticed. I mean, remember, you're the only person that knows what what you wanted to say. Everybody else hears what you did say. And so you might then have this really big judgment about the difference between how perfect it was when you planned it and then what you actually said. But no one else has any concept of whether it could have been more brilliant. They hear what you've said. And I think it's more important to get that sense of, look, this person really cares about this topic. I really got a sense that they were passionate, that they knew what they were talking about. They stumbled over their words a few times, but it's not important to me. I'm more interested in the rest of it, the background story, because really presentations are artificial, aren't they? Like some of the things I've been talking about here, it's sort of how you can make it a bit more natural and a bit less artificial, because it is this completely artificial environment. I mean, this webinar, it's completely bizarre having a one-sided conversation with a bunch of people. And so it's going to feel uncomfortable. So yeah, trying to, I think, be kind to yourself and focus on what do you want to achieve with it and the goals, rather than, oh God, I said the word again.
Thanks, Kezia. I've got no more questions. If everyone does have a question, feel free to add it into our Q&A box, but we are going to close out the webinar shortly, so please try and get them in as quick as possible.
Yeah, or like I said, if you've got something that you'd rather discuss offline in person with me, then I'm happy to do that as well. There's so many things that we could discuss about presentations, and I mean, again, it's been quite broad brush in terms of just general skills, but there's so many specific things that we could talk about with regard to the different types of presentations. Trying to convey that, how you might prepare for a keynote might be really quite different to how you would prepare for a pitch, for example.
Are there any last comments that you'd like to make, Kezia, on anything that you've discussed today?
No, I think that the one thing that I want you all to take away from it is just to go out and have a try and be kind to yourselves. Most of the time, people are just impressed that you've got up and given it a go. The amount of people that don't get up and give it a go, you're already miles ahead of lots of people. So the more you can just put yourself out there and give it a try, there's much more to be gained than lost, I think, even if it's unnatural and mildly terrifying.
Thank you. So we'll close out the webinar now. Just a few quick recaps. If you are not part of our Women in Innovation subscribers, please do sign up for our newsletter. It will give you details of any future webinars that we hold and events, competitions, and any news that might be relevant. We also have an online community on World Labs, so that's the that's the URL address on your screen now. If you join the community, you'll have access to not only all our webinars, but there's additional materials on there and resources. And we also have a forum on there, so if there is any questions or anything that you would like us to be able to provide you, then please do write it in the forum and we will do our best to cater to any requests. And if you'd like to get in touch with me personally, my email address is on the screen now. So it's sharon.smith@ktn-uk.org. And please feel free to email me with any questions that you have about the Women in Innovation programme. Hopefully we will see you again at one of our future webinars or events. And thank you all for joining, and thank you, Kezia, for your time today.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.